At 6:10 a.m., a man named Barry Sutcliffe and two colleagues discovered an injured woman on their way to work. They immediately took her to a nearby home of Michael and Margaret Coop and alerted the residents to call for an ambulance. Michael Coop described her injuries as both her hands appeared like ash and her legs were just like raw meat, and her feet appeared to be badly jarred. He was also struck by her politeness, noting that she was constantly thanking my wife for her assistance. Margaret Coop detailed further injuries, stating that her head was shaved and there were recent cuts. She added that the victim's face was almost featureless and her hands were like raw meat and black at the fingertips. Describing her legs, Margaret Coop said that they were red from top to bottom and extremely sensitive to touch, explaining that the victim recoiled when she tried to offer comfort as if she didn't want to be touched. The paramedics arrived and this woman was rushed to Withington Hospital on 18th of December 1992. When the doctors at the hospital saw this woman, they were shocked to see the state she was in and immediately realized that she must have been subjected to inhumane torture. The doctors at the hospital did everything they could to try and save this woman, but the body had been so badly burned they weren't sure if she would survive for long and were surprised that she was still breathing and conscious despite the state that she was in, which completely baffled them. But the reason why she was still conscious because she had to tell the name of the perpetrators who did this to her. Somehow this woman had survived the whole ordeal just to provide the names and the addresses so that she could get justice. This woman then informed that she was kidnapped and held captive for 7 days at a house in Moston, Manchester, before falling into a coma. In the heart or within Shaw, a neighborhood in Manchester, England, lived a 16-year-old girl who became the victim of one of the most horrific crimes of the 1990s. Suzanne Capper was a quiet, withdrawn teenager living a life marked by personal struggles, family issues, and a difficult history with the foster care system. Born on December 27, 1975, Suzanne Capper's earlier life was as far from easy. Raised in a broken home, she was placed in foster care at a young age. She had turbulent relationship with her family, particularly her mother, and it often left her feeling isolated and searching for acceptance. Described as gentle and easy influence, Suzanne Jane Capper had been babysit by Jean Powell since she was 6. After her parents separated in 1990, Capper spent time with the local authority care before returning to live with her stepfather and older sister Michelle. Around this time, her attendance at Moston Brook High School became erratic, marked by increasing absence and a growing tendency to spend time at Powell's house. At 97 Langworthy Road, Moston, Powell occupied a small Victorian terrace house, which served as a base for her illicit operations encompassing drug trafficking and the handling of stolen vehicles. Michelle, Capper's sister, also had briefly cohabited with Powell, but relocated in August 1992, citing her aversion to Powell's evil new friends, especially Bernadette McNeely, who had recently settled 3 doors down at number 91. McNeely, who had 3 children, subsequently took up residence with Powell and her 3 children, leading to an overcrowded situation where Powell and McNeely shared a bed in the downstairs dining room due to the bedrooms being full of children. Despite enduring regular bullying from Powell and McNeely, Capper continued to frequent the house. Capper's sister clarified her sister's motivations, stating that it was not that she was scared of them, it's just that she would do anything for them. She pampered their every whim. Powell was separated from her husband Glenn, but they stayed friendly and he regularly visited from his nearby home. In addition to this, Powell also had relationships with Anthony Dodson, the 16-year-old boyfriend of McNeely, and Jeffrey Lake, who frequented her home to buy amphetamines. Her younger brother Clifford Book was also a frequent visitor. During the subsequent trial, various rationales for Capper's kidnapping were presented, various petty grudges that made no sense. These included Powell's assertion that Capper had attempted to solicit her for hooking with an Arab, McNeely and Dodson's belief that Capper had infected them with genitalia lice, and McNeely's claim that Capper had stolen a pink duffel coat belonging to her. The assault on Capper stemmed from an incident in November 1992 when one day high on meth, Sated Dutson said that he had contracted genitalia lice and shaved his hair down there. McNally blamed Capper for the lies, although Dutson confided in Jean Powell that he suspected McNally herself. On December 7th, the suspicion escalated into violence. Capper was lured under false pretenses to Powell's home, where Glynn and Dutson were already present. She was immediately ambushed, restrained, and subjected to a series of humiliating and violent acts. Glynn shaved her head and eyebrows, made her clean up the hair and placed it in a bin. Then he placed a plastic bag over her head and repeatedly struck her. Powell and McNally joined in the abuse, kicking her and then taking turns beating her with a wooden instrument and a belt as she lay curled up on the floor. The culmination of this abuse was the forced shaving of Capper's genitalia hair in the bathroom, framed as a ritual humiliation for allegedly causing Dutson and McNally's own shaving incident. Afterward, Powell held Capper captive, locking her in a cupboard for the night. Subsequent to the events of the previous day, Capper was relocated to an upstairs portion of the residence and secured within a cupboard. On December 8th, a decision was made to transfer Capper to McNally's house, motivated by apprehensions that her vocal distress was negatively impacting Powell and McNally's 6 children. Upon arrival at McNally's house, she was restrained in a downstairs back room by being tied in a spread eagle position to an inverted bed using electrical flex. During a 5-day period, Capper experienced escalating violence, described as increasing in severity and brutality as the time passed. The abuse inflicted upon her involved repeated beatings, injections of amphetamines, and burn with cigarettes. She was also subjected to intensely loud rave music played via headphones, notably the track Hi, I'm Chucky, Wanna Play by 150 volts, which incorporates sample from the film Child's Play.
I'm Chucky, wanna play?
Reportedly, McNally initiated each instance of torture with the ominous statement, Chucky's coming to play. During the week, Pook and Leigh visited the house and found Capper in a horrifying state. She was blindfolded, gagged, and tied to the bed. For days, Capper had been lying in her own waste. She was then forced into a bath of concentrated disinfectant and scrubbed with a stiff brush so aggressively that it removed layers of her skin. Following this, Pook, the psycho, used pliers to pull out 2 of her teeth. These teeth were later discovered at Pook's house by police, describing as a macabre trophy. Dutson, who witnessed some of this, stated that I was stood at the doorway with Jenny Powell and Bernie McNally. Cliff took her gag off. He told her to open her mouth. He announced his intent, right, I'm going to rip your teeth out. He immediately commenced his attack, hammering at her teeth with pliers. His first attempt to extract a tooth failed, resulting only in a snap and a chip. He brutally struck them again, securing the pliers once more. He exerted extreme force, wrenching Suzanne's head forward until her sharp snap echoed, and he held the prize, a tooth, in his pliers. He repeated this violent act, his laughter punctuating horror, filling his pliers full of blood. At one time during the 7 days, 18-year-old David Hill was asked to watch the house, and while there, he heard Dutson yelling in the back room. When he inquired about the noise, Lake showed Suzanne Capper. Hill saw clear signs of torture on Capper. Despite being left alone with her, Hill did not free her. Capper pleaded with him for help, asking him to untie her and identifying herself as Suzanne. Hill admitted he refused to assist, saying that I couldn't do anything. He later claimed his inaction was due to the fear of Leigh, explaining, I thought they would batter me. I didn't know what to do. I was too shocked to do anything. Driven by the fear of missing person report from Capper's family, the Psycho 6 attackers decided to eliminate her from the house. In the pre-dawn darkness of November 14, 1992, Capper was brutally forced into the boot of a stolen white Fiat Panda. McNally, Powells, and Dutson, these monsters, then drove her 15 miles to a secluded lane at Vernet Low, near Rumley. McNally reportedly giggled during this horrifying journey. At this isolated location, Capper was pushed down an embankment into thorny brambles. According to Powell, McNally then doused the injured girl with petrol. When the accelerant stubbornly refused to ignite, Clint Powell and Dutson repeatedly struggled to light it before finally engulfing Capper's body in flames. Horrifically as Capper burned, McNally sang Burn Baby Burn from the song Disco Inferno. Thinking their victim was dead, the group returned to Jean Powell's house, pausing chillingly to buy canned drinks. Leigh and Pook were present when they arrived back at the residence. These really sad examples of life for the rest of us. Warnet Low was the scene of the brutal attack where Capper suffered horrific burns that tragically led to her death. Despite these devastating injuries, Capper demonstrated incredible resilience. After her attackers fled, she managed to pull herself back up the embankment and horrifically burned. Staggered alone the distance for about a quarter of a mile for about 400 meters to Comstall Road. It was there she was found at 6:10 by Barry Sutcliffe and two colleagues on their way to work. Even with horrific injuries to her hands that prevented her from holding a glass of water, Capper was able to drink 6 glasses of water. She was so thirsty. Rushed to the hospital, and before succumbing to a coma, she bravely named her 6 assailants and provided Powell's address. The burns were so devastating that her mother and stepfather couldn't identify her, requiring a partial thumbprint for positive identification, the only part of her hand not severely burned. Capper tragically died on December 18, 1992, never regaining consciousness again. The investigation into the death of Capper was headed by Detective Inspector Peter Wall of Greater Manchester Police. His first action at 7:30 a.m. on December 14th was to order the officers to raid 97 Langworthy Road and arrest everyone inside. In a chilling display of callousness, the sadist Jean Powell and McNally reportedly laughed and joked as they were taken into custody, really thinking of it as a child's play. Despite initial denials from all 6, the tide turned during questioning when Dodson, spurred by his father's insistence on honesty, started to speak. D.I. Ball later recounted his shock at Dodson's confession. As the story began to unfold, we just couldn't believe it. I kept asking myself how one human being could do this to another. The sheer horror of Suzanne's ordeal deeply affected even the hardened police officers, with reports stating that some wept as the extent of it was revealed. Touched by her suffering, the police force and civilian staff at the station collectively raised funds to send flowers to Suzanne in the hospital. On December 17, 1992, the sadist 6 individuals were formally charged with kidnapping and attempted murder before Manchester magistrates and remanded into custody. The charges were tragically upgraded to murder on December 23, 1992, following Capper's passing. Paul Barlow, the fiancé of Capper's sister Michelle, was unknowingly assisted by Lake and Dodson in repairing his car, a kindness offered while they knew Suzanne was being held captive and tortured in the house. Barlow's fury at this deception was clear. They could have told me then and there. The door would have been knocked down and I would have got Suzanne out. He expressed his profound shock and anger at their actions, stating, "I did not think that they were capable of such savagery. Now all I want is 10 minutes with them in the back room." But by this time it was already too late, and he knew that, feeling guilty at the same time upon realizing about the opportunity lost of saving her. The devastating suffering of Suzanne Capper was highlighted at the inquest opened by Leonard Gorotkin at Manchester's Coroner's Court on January 8, 1993. Pathologist Dr. William Lawler testified to the horrific nature of her injuries, stating that these 75 to 80% burns covering her body, consistent with being set alight with petrol, left her with almost no hope of survival. Lawler confirmed that the burns and subsequent complications were the cause of the death. Coroner Gorotkin emphasized her ordeal, stating, "It is clear that this young girl must have suffered a great deal of pain and had no chance of survival. Despite this, he acknowledged her critical role in the investigation, noting that she survived just long enough to give the information which led to the people mentioned being charged with her death." Gorotkin concluded by offering profound sympathy to Capper's bereaved mother and stepfather, expressing national condolences for the tragic happening to their young daughter. The trial for these 6 demon defendants, the 6 sad examples of life, started on November 16, 1993 and continued for 22 days. Throughout the proceedings, each defendant denied the murder charge and tried to downplay their part in the crime when they gave evidence. After the trial phase concluded, the jury began their deliberations on December 16, 1993, taking 9 hours and 52 minutes to reach their verdicts. Upon announcing the verdicts, Mr. Justice Potts stated, "Each of you has been convicted on clear evidence of murder, which was as appalling a murder as it is possible to imagine, confirming the gravity of the crime and the strength of the prosecution's case." Bernadette McNally received a life sentence for murder with a minimum term of 25 years, later reduced to 24 years in 2013. Jane Powell was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder with a minimum term of 25 years. Glenn Powell received a life sentence for murder with a minimum term of 25 years. Jeffrey Lay pleaded guilty to false imprisonment and received a 12-year sentence. Anthony Michael Dutson was detained indefinitely for murder with a minimum term of 18 years reduced to 16 years in 2002. Clifford Book pleaded guilty to conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and false imprisonment, receiving a 15-year sentence for each. He was acquitted of murder on 24th November on the directions of Mr. Justice Potts. The courtroom's atmosphere was charged as the sentences were announced. Two jurors were moved to tears, and the victims' relatives in the overflowing public gallery reacted with cries of "yes, yes." Later in the press statement, Detective Inspector Wall emphasized the unsettling ordinariness of the convicted individuals. He cited psychological assessments to confirm their sanity, stating, "It's frightening that they are such ordinary people. There is nothing special about any of them." Lay was freed early from his sentence in 1998, and Book was released on license in May 2001, similarly ahead of schedule. Dudson's release followed in 2013 after his 18-year-old minimum sentence was reduced by 2 years in 2002. In 2015, McNally was paroled after a 1-year reduction to her 25-year minimum sentence. She was also noted as a model prisoner. Jane Powell was released in 2017, and Glenn Powell was the last to be released on license in May 2023. It is heartbreaking and tragic when someone has the ability to intervene but doesn't out of fear or self-preservation, especially in such a horrific situation. David Hill, an 18-year-old who was present during some of the abuse Suzanne Capper suffered, is often cited as the key figure in the case who could have potentially helped her, but like many others in the story, he failed to act. David Hill had been friends with Sarah Williams and was part of the group that tortured Suzanne, yet he didn't step up to save her, even when he realized the extent of the violence. His inaction stems from a combination of fear, peer pressure, and perhaps an unwillingness to confront the brutality of what was happening. He, like the others involved, seemed paralyzed by the situation, afraid of what might happen to him if he spoke out or tried to stop the abuse. It's devastating to think that someone who might have had the opportunity to save Suzanne didn't because of the fear of the consequences. His failure to act is a chilling example of how fear can keep people from doing what they know is right, even when they are witnesses to something as tragic and violent as what Suzanne endured. What's more poignant is that David's position wasn't one of the direct involvement in the torture. He could have been a bystander, someone who could have chosen to call for help, get authorities involved, or simply intervene in some way. Instead, he chose silence, and in doing so became an unwilling accomplice to Suzanne's suffering. In many ways, his fear, whether of the people he was with or of the consequences, shows the complexities of the human behavior in extreme situations. We often hear about how bystanders can feel powerless or intimidated in dangerous situations. But Suzanne's case highlights just how painful and tragic that inaction can be when someone's life is on the line. It's really sad to think on the way people sometimes fail to recognize the importance of speaking up and taking responsibility when they witness injustice. But Suzanne's case highlights just how painful and tragic that inaction can be when someone's life is on the line. It's really sad to think on the way people sometimes fail to recognize the importance of speaking up and taking responsibility when they witness injustice. Suzanne deserved far better than what she got, and her tragic story should serve as a reminder to never be passive in the face of cruelty. The sheer violence and cruelty Suzanne endured for several days is almost beyond comprehension. She was tortured, beaten, burned, and mentally tormented in the most sadistic ways by sadistic individuals. The level of cruelty is so extreme, it's difficult to grasp why any human being would inflict such suffering on another person. It's not just that she died, it's that she suffered terribly in the moments leading up to her death. The fact that no one stepped in to stop it, despite knowing what was happening, is devastating on humanity's part. The justice system also failed Suzanne Capper in several ways, from inadequate sentencing and failure to charge perpetrators appropriately, and the light sentencing of the perpetrators and their earlier release. The justice system and the social services often fail to offer adequate protection or support for vulnerable youths like Suzanne, and her tragic end is a stark reminder of how vulnerable young people can be in situations where they feel isolated or alienated. If the system had intervened earlier in her life, offering her more stability and support, it's possible that she wouldn't have ended up in a situation where she was preyed upon. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. And if the story resonates with you and you would like to hear more such stories, then do subscribe to the channel and turn on all the notifications. I will see you in the next one.